The western Mediterranean at night holds a particular kind of stillness. Below, the sea absorbs starlight into its ancient depths. Above, the airspace belongs to no one and everyone. A US forward operating airbase sat along the Mediterranean coastline that night, its perimeter secured, its airspace continuously monitored. Surveillance systems tracked every aircraft within range, filtering civilian traffic from military movement with a precision born of decades of refinement. Nothing escaped the electronic net. Nothing was supposed to. At this hour, 208 hours local time activity was minimal. Most operations had shifted to standby cycles. The runway lights glowed in low luminance. Ground crews moved through their checklists with the practiced ease of routine. Radar systems continued their mechanical sweeps, painting the same predictable picture they had painted for weeks. Commercial flights traversed established corridors. Allied patrols transmitted identification signals without fail. Occasional long-range surveillance aircraft maintained respectful distances. The pattern of movement was known, expected, logged. Nothing unusual, nothing urgent. But airspace security is built on a single, unforgiving assumption that any deviation matters. Inside the base's radar control station, an operator named Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez was reviewing the night's tracking logs when she noticed something that didn't fit. Two signals, weak at first. Low altitude, approaching from the southwest. The returns were intermittent, appearing briefly, holding for a few sweeps, then fading into background noise. At first glance, they resembled terrain, interference, or signal clutter, the kind of ghost returns that every radar system generates and every operator learns to ignore. But Vasquez had been doing this for 9 years. She knew the difference between noise and something trying to hide. These returns were moving. And more importantly, they were coordinated. She adjusted filters manually, isolating the returns from environmental interference. The signal strengthened slightly, just enough to confirm her suspicion. Two separate aircraft, maintaining formation, flying dark, flying low, flying toward a US military installation. She picked up the phone. "Watch supervisor, main floor. I need a track correlation on Sector 7. The system attempted automatic classification. The result came back empty. No transponder response, no identification signal, no flight plan on file anywhere in the NATO database. The aircraft were operating without standard communication. That alone was enough to trigger escalation protocols. Inside the command structure, the situation shifted from observation to response. Lights came on in the base operations center. Officers moved to their stations. Coffee cups were set aside. The tone of voices changed from routine to precise. Unidentified aircraft approaching a US installation without warning was not routine. It was not ambiguous. It was a problem requiring immediate resolution. Rapid assessment. Data from multiple sensors was pulled together: radar, infrared, electronic signatures, passive acoustic arrays. Analysts worked in parallel, cross-referencing every available return. The aircraft maintained low altitude under 5,000 feet, likely to reduce detection range and avoid over-the-horizon radar coverage. Their speed was consistent with advanced fighter platforms. Not too fast to generate excessive heat, not too slow to be civilian. They were moving with purpose. As the signals became clearer, the system began narrowing possible classifications. Wing geometry suggested delta configuration. Engine heat signature matched twin engine after burning turbofans. Then the profile matched 2 Dassault Rafale fighters. French, Allied, unannounced. Approaching dark? The identification raised immediate questions that had no immediate answers. Why were they approaching without coordination? Why no communication on any emergency or guard frequency? And why at low altitude using terrain masking with transponders off? The watch commander looked at his senior intelligence officer. "Get me everything we have on current French naval operations in the region, and someone call the attaché." Alert status raised to Bravo. The base shifted to elevated readiness. Ground-based air defense systems activated additional tracking protocols. Surface-to-air missile units conducted rapid system checks. Air defense networks expanded their monitoring range outward by 60 nautical miles. Communication channels attempted to establish contact on every available frequency: military air-to-air, civilian guard, emergency channels, NATO tactical nets. Channel 121.5, Guard. Unidentified aircraft approaching coastal airspace. This is US military control. Squawk, identification, or state your intentions. Silence. Channel 243, Military Guard. Same message, same silence. Channel 228.9, NATO Air Tactical. Aircraft approaching from southwest. This is coalition control. Respond immediately. Nothing. The Rafales continued forward. Their trajectory brought them closer to the outer defensive perimeter of the base. Distance 40 nautical miles and closing. The scramble order was issued. 2 Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor fighters, already on 5-minute alert, received the launch authorization. The crew chiefs pulled the chocks. Engines spooled to life with a sound that was less a roar and more a controlled explosion contained within titanium and ceramic composites. Within 90 seconds, the first Raptor was rolling. Within 2 minutes, both were airborne. The mission was clear, delivered in the clipped syntax of pilots who have done this 100 times in training and prayed they would never have to do it for real. Identify, control, prevent escalation. The Raptors climbed aggressively, afterburners lighting the dark sky in brief, accusing blossoms of blue-orange flame. Their noses rose. The coastline fell away. The Mediterranean spread beneath them like black glass. Intercept vector established. The Raptors accelerated to supersonic cruise, aligning with the projected path of the Rafales. Their onboard AN/APG 77 AESA radars began painting the airspace ahead, building a three-dimensional picture of everything that moved between the surface and 90,000 feet. Unlike the ground-based radar systems which had struggled to maintain track on the low altitude, terrain-masked Rafales, the F-22S, had no difficulty. From their perch at the edge of the stratosphere, looking down through clear air, both Rafales were fully visible. Speed 450 knots. Altitude 3,800 feet. Heading 045. Formation line abreast, 3-mile separation. All data stable, all data confirmed. The intercept was now under control. As the gap narrowed, the F-22S adjusted formation. Flight lead callsign Hunter 1 moved into an offset position ahead of the Rafales' projected flight path. Wingman Hunter 2 took a trailing offset, creating a geometric shape that air combat professionals call a bracket. Their goal was not engagement. It was not escalation. It was interception and redirection, the airborne equivalent of a hand on the shoulder, a polite but firm steering towards safe ground. Inside the Rafale cockpits, the situation was becoming clear. Their passive warning receivers would have registered the F-22's radar illumination, by now not a lock, but a search, a query, a question being asked. They were no longer approaching undetected. They were being tracked precisely. And still they maintained course. First contact attempt from Hunter 1. The transmission was short, professional, unambiguous. Unidentified aircraft, you are approaching a restricted military zone. Identify yourselves and state your intent. A pause. 4 seconds? 7 seconds. In air combat, that is an eternity. Then a response accented, measured, carrying the particular flatness of a pilot who knows exactly what he is doing and has decided to do it anyway. This is French Air Force conducting navigation exercise. We are maintaining course. The explanation was calm. It was even reasonable on its face. Navigation exercises happen, Allied aircraft train in international airspace, no law was being broken. But the explanation was also incomplete, because the approach pattern low altitude, transponders off, no flight plan, no coordination, did not match standard navigation procedures. Not for the French Air Force. Not for any professional air force. Hunter 1 keyed the mic again. French aircraft, You are approaching within 15 nautical miles of a US forward operating base. You are required to identify and declare intent. Acknowledge. A shorter pause this time, then we acknowledge, we maintain course. No deviation, no turn, no compliance. Tactical standoff. The four aircraft now occupied the same slice of Mediterranean sky separated by distance, fully aware of each other's presence, operating under the tense choreography of a confrontation that no one had yet named. The Rafales did not turn away, the F-22S did not escalate further, but the airspace between them was no longer neutral. It had become contested not by weapons, but by will. Both sides were now operating under heightened awareness, every sensor active, every pilot's eyes scanning, every hand resting near controls that could change the nature of the encounter in milliseconds. And the situation was far from over. This is where the engagement changed. The shift began subtly. Hunter 1 and Hunter 2 adjusted their vectors by only a few degrees each, barely perceptible on the Rafales displays, the kind of movement that could be mistaken for random variation or minor course correction. But the effect was immediate and profound. Instead of flying directly toward the incoming Rafale pair, which would have created a head-on closure geometry, the Raptors moved into offset positions ahead of the Rafale's projected path. They were no longer approaching, they were positioning. It wasn't a block, it wasn't a threat, it was a funnel. From the Rafales' perspective, forward airspace was still open. No one was directly in their way. No one was flashing warning lights or painting them with fire control radar. But every available path now led into narrower corridors. Any attempt to continue straight would bring them closer to Hunter 1 while exposing their flank to Hunter 2. Any turn to the left would tighten the bracket. Any turn to the right would push them farther from their apparent objective. Inside the Rafale cockpits, the change was noticeable, not aggressive, but deliberate. Every second that passed reduced their maneuvering freedom without a single direct command being given, without a single hostile act being committed. This is what air dominance looks like before the shooting starts. It looks like geometry. It looks like mathematics. It looks like a box being built around you, 1 degree at a time. Tracking imbalance became operational. The Rafales RBE-2 AESA radar systems attempted to stabilize tracking on the F-22S. The returns refused to cooperate. Contacts appeared briefly sharp enough to confirm position, then faded into electronic noise. Attempts to maintain lock resulted in fluctuating signals that never fully stabilized. The pilots switched between radar modes, high PRF, medium PRF, interleaved search. They adjusted frequency agility settings, they changed scan patterns, range gates, Doppler filters. The results didn't change. Intermittent visibility, incomplete tracking, a tactical picture that fractured the moment they tried to hold it. At the same time, the Raptors maintained uninterrupted awareness. Through fused sensor integration radar, infrared, electronic support measures, both Rafales remained fully visible. Position updates every second. Speed and altitude confirmed with each sweep. Heading changes tracked before the Rafales completed their turns. The imbalance was now operational. One side was observing with perfect clarity, the other was reacting to ghosts. The first warning tone cut through the cockpit of the lead Rafale. Short, distinct, unmistakable. Missile lock indicator. The pilot, a seasoned aviator with over 2,000 hours in fighter aircraft, reacted immediately. He rolled into a defensive brake turn, pulling G-forces that pressed him deep into his seat while deploying countermeasures. Flares released into the night air, bright, brief, beautiful, dispersing behind the aircraft in a constellation of decoy heat. No missile followed. The lock remained steady for a moment longer. Then, as the maneuver completed and the Rafale settled into its new heading, the tone stopped. Silence. Then it returned from a different angle. The second Rafale now registered a lock as well. Not the same source. A different vector. A different Raptor. The pattern became clear to both pilots simultaneously. The locks were not attempts to fire. They were not system errors. They were demonstrations. Controlled, precise, unmistakable. Each lock appeared just long enough to be understood. just long enough to be felt, then released. The message: we have you. We have always had you. We are choosing not to end this. The Rafales attempted to break the pattern. A coordinated defensive maneuver. The lead aircraft climbing hard while the wingman descended and turned inside the vertical plane. Standard technique for disrupting an established bracket, forcing the interceptors to choose between targets, creating separation, buying time and space. For a brief moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4, separation increased. The lock indicators dropped. The pressure eased. Then they returned from new vectors. The F-22S had already repositioned. Hunter 1 climbed to maintain vertical coverage. Hunter 2 slid laterally, preserving the bracket geometry despite the Rafales maneuvering. Their spacing adjusted with precision, not reactive, not chasing, but anticipatory. They were flying the engagement 10 seconds ahead of the Rafales' decisions. Every maneuver by the Rafales produced the same result: temporary relief, followed by immediate re-engagement from a different angle. Turn, climb, dive. Nothing changed. The airspace was no longer open. It was being shaped in real time by pilots who had already solved problems the Rafales hadn't yet recognized. Without warning, system behavior began to change in the Rafale cockpits. At first, it was minor. Radar clarity dropped slightly, nothing dramatic, just a softening of contact resolution. Background noise increased, the electronic equivalent of static creeping into a clear signal. Then the changes compounded. Signal resolution decreased further, making it harder to distinguish contacts from interference. Data refresh rate slowed, creating small but meaningful delays between real-world movement and cockpit display updates. Communication channels experienced brief, stuttering distortions, short interruptions that forced repeated transmissions, forced pilots to ask, "Say again," forced seconds to bleed away. The pilots recognized the pattern immediately. This was not environmental. This was not equipment failure. This was electronic pressure. The interference became more refined, more surgical. Primary flight systems remained stable. The Rafales could still fly, still maneuver, still fight. But sensor systems degraded with each passing minute. Tracking data flickered in and out like a failing light bulb. Targeting information became inconsistent, showing one contact here, another there, never the full picture. The aircraft was still fully operational. Their pilots were still capable. But their ability to build a reliable tactical picture, the foundation of every engagement decision, was diminishing. Attempts to compensate only triggered further instability. Switching radar modes increased noise, adjusting frequencies reduced detection range. Recycling systems introduced boot-up delays that left the pilots blind for agonizing seconds. Every correction introduced a new limitation. Every adaptation was met with counter-adaptation. The interference was learning. It was adapting faster than they could respond. Fragmented awareness. Inside the cockpits, situational awareness, that fragile, precious commodity that separates fighter pilots from everyone else, began to fracture. The F-22S was still visible intermittently, but never both at once, never with full clarity. One contact would appear sharply position, speed, heading all present, while the other faded to nothing. Then the roles would reverse. Then both would vanish. Then one would return from a different quadrant. The pilots could sense the structure around them. They knew they were being boxed, they knew they were being tracked, but they couldn't fully map it. They couldn't see the whole cage. Meanwhile, the Raptors maintained perfect clarity. Their formation held. Their spacing remained precise. Their coverage remained complete. Hunter 1 looked at his tactical display and saw both Rafales, both wingmen, both positions, both trajectories. He saw their fuel state from their previous altitude changes. He saw their last known weapons configuration from electronic signatures. He saw everything. The Rafales saw fragments. The second lock cycle. The warning tones returned. This time, they overlapped both Rafales, registering simultaneous lock indicators from separate vectors, separate Raptors, separate firing solutions. The pilots initiated defensive maneuvers again, hard turns that pressed 9 Gs against their bodies. altitude shifts that compressed and decompressed their chests, countermeasure deployment that emptied their remaining flare magazines. The locks held longer this time. 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. In air combat, that is an eternity. Long enough to simulate full engagement conditions. Long enough for onboard systems to calculate the inescapable mathematics of range, closure, and missile kinematics. Long enough for every warning tone to translate into a single, unambiguous fact. You are dead. Then released. The message was no longer subtle. It had never been subtle. But now it was undeniable. Firing solutions had been achieved. Not once, not twice. Repeatedly from multiple angles with multiple weapons across multiple seconds. The Raptors had killed them a dozen times in the space of a single minute and chosen not to press the button. Attempted breakout. The Rafale lead made a decision. He transmitted to his wingman, "Break, break, separate now, full military power. Climb to Angels 3 to 5, go." Both aircraft executed simultaneously, accelerating to maximum dry thrust, diverging in opposite directions before initiating a climbing turn. The maneuver was aggressive, well-coordinated, and fundamentally sound. Standard doctrine for breaking engagement geometry. For a moment, 5 seconds, 6 seconds, maybe 7 distance increased. The locks disappeared, the interference reduced, the displays cleared. It almost worked. Then the Raptors adjusted. Faster than the Rafales could track. Cleaner than their degraded sensors could follow. Hunter 1 rolled inverted and pulled, repositioning to reacquire the climbing Rafale. Hunter 2 extended and turned, sliding into lag pursuit on the other. Their positions shifted just enough to re-establish coverage, closing the geometry again without aggressive pursuit, without overcommitting, without violating the invisible box they had built. The breakout had failed. Not because it was incorrect, not because it was poorly executed, but because it had been anticipated. Because the Raptors were not reacting to the Rafales, they were flying the engagement from a future that had not yet arrived. System alerts activated simultaneously in both Rafale cockpits. Simulated kill confirmation. The data scrolling across their multifunction displays was clinical, undeniable, and devastating. Lock achieved, tracking stable. Range within engagement envelope, minimum abort distance exceeded. Simulated weapon impact confirmed. The system had completed the full engagement sequence from acquisition through tracking, through launch authorization, through impact calculation. No missile had been physically launched, no button had been pressed. But the sequence had run to completion. The outcome was no longer theoretical. It was calculated. It was confirmed. It was logged. 2 Rafales, 2 simulated kills. 0 seconds remaining on the clock. At this stage, the engagement stabilized into something almost peaceful. The Rafales reduced maneuver intensity not because they had given up, but because their pilots had finally accepted the mathematics of their position. There was no advantage left in movement. No combination of turns, climbs, or countermeasures would alter the geometry the Raptors had established. The Rafales maintained controlled flight paths without further attempts to break the structure. They were still professional, still disciplined, still ready to fight if the order came. But the order did not come. Because fight what? Fight where? Fight against whom? The Raptors maintained their positions at a measured distance, no longer tightening the geometry, but not releasing it either. Their patience was absolute. Their control was complete. The airspace remained under control, complete, unchallenged. Through the remaining interference, which had lessened now, as if the electronic pressure was no longer needed, a transmission came through. Clear, stable, direct. French aircraft, you are approaching restricted operational space. Alter course immediately and exit the area. No escalation, no threat, no warning about what would happen if they refused. Only instruction backed by demonstrated capability that made further instruction unnecessary. Inside the Rafale cockpits, the decision was immediate. The lead pilot looked at his wingman. His wingman looked back. Neither needed to speak. With degraded systems, with confirmed targeting, With no tactical advantage and no strategic objective that justified continuation was not viable. The lead pilot keyed the mic. "US aircraft, this is French flight. We are altering course, exiting the area. À pause." Acknowledged French flight. Safe transit. Both Rafales adjusted heading smoothly, a coordinated turn to the southwest, increasing distance from the restricted zone, moving away from the Raptors, away from the base, away from the confrontation. The maneuver was controlled, professional and final. The F-22S maintained position briefly, ensuring separation, confirming the change in trajectory, watching the Rafales' distance increase with each radar sweep. No pursuit, no further pressure, no vindictive lock tones, no degrading interference, no closing geometry. As the Rafales moved away, the engagement geometry dissolved. The invisible box opened. The funnel became open sky again. Gradually, silently, the Raptors climbed to higher altitude, back to their perch at the edge of the stratosphere, back to the quiet watchfulness that was their default state. They reduced their already minimal radar signatures. Their electronic emissions dropped to near zero. Tracking systems on the ground and on the departing Rafales lost clarity almost immediately, then lost contact entirely. The airspace returned to its previous state. Open, quiet, unoccupied. The Mediterranean resumed its ancient stillness. The starlight returned to the water. The base returned to standby. Nothing unusual. Nothing urgent. Operational end. Inside monitoring systems across the base, the final data points were recorded and archived. The tracking logs were closed. The alert status was downgraded. The pilots filed their reports. The crews returned to their barracks. No weapons discharged. No damage sustained. No injuries, no diplomatic incidents, no news coverage, no history recorded. But the engagement had produced a definitive result. Not through force, not through destruction, not through the 100,000-pound violence that fighter aircraft are capable of delivering. Through control, through geometry, through the patient, absolute, undeniable demonstration of what happens when one side sees everything and the other side sees almost nothing. And in modern air combat, in the space between radar sweeps, between lock tones, between the moment a threat appears and the moment a decision is made, control defines the outcome, long before a shot is ever fired.